Morning. Ayin Beis. We finished the paragraph. We actually did not finish the paragraph. We're in the middle of the page 1241. 1241. Well, actually, we did finish the paragraph. Sorry. We finished the paragraph on page 1241. And what we learned was the contrast of what is called a zivug shalom, a complete union of chachma and binah, of abba ve'ima, father and mother, the supernal father and mother, which is chachma and binah, and a zivug she'ein shalom, that's not complete, which not a complete union, or not a perfect union, if you wish. And this is a language from Eitz Chaim, Shar HaZivugim, chapter 2, cited on top of page 1237. And now on this page 1241, tying it all together. And the Nakuda is the point, summarized point is that the Zivug Shalom is when Chachma and Binah are gazing at the Metzach of Arich Anpin, the forehead of Arich Anpin, which in turn draws the 370 Shin Ayin Beis lights and energies from Pnimius Atik. What that means, so like physically we see that the forehead, the face in general, the countenance of a person, say Ponim Tzehuves, a glow, an aura, and specifically the Metzach, the forehead, reflects something of what he called an atzmi, a core type of energy. And when you access that, you actually can change and create new and unprecedented energy. And that is what happens when there's that yichud of Chachma and Binah. What it means in language of Chassidus is when Binah is at its highest state, that the comprehension is at the same stature as the Chachma, meaning that what you understand, the details, as you integrate them on your terms, are also include that they become absorbed in a higher reality, a total bittul, just as Chachma. So Chachma and Binah are involved in experiencing something far greater than they. And the Zivug she'ein shalom is when Binah is focused more on his comprehension and the hisbonenus, the contemplation that gives birth to and that protects and guides the midas, the emotions. In the language, Eim habonim, the mother of the children, like he says, Eim revetzes al afreichim, like the mother chicken that rests upon and spreads itself out over its chicks. So the chicks here is the bonin, revi al bonin, which is the emotions. So Binah is then the moichin is shaykh to midas. In that itself, there are two levels. There's chitzenius hameichin, where the midas are dominant, but they're midas that are guided by intelligence. And then there is pnimius hameichin, which is also Binah. She says that's already in a level. He says pnimius hameichin also meichin shayachim el midas. So it's more cognitive, but it's still not outside of the structure. Talking on the human level, it's not outside and changing the very natural structure of our emotions. It's just that the emotions are on a very high, mature level. Chachma, on the other hand, as we learned, takes the emotions and can change them because it goes out of the system. So Chachma elevates the emotions to midas sichlim, and especially when Chachma and Binah come together in the Zivug Shalom, in a complete union, then it's already completely absorbing Arich and Atik. So we have in Binah itself, Primis HaMeich, Tzenis HaMeich, and Primis HaMeich, Gadlus HaMeich HaShayachim El HaMidas, and Atzmius HaBinah, which clearly is connected to Atzmius HaChacham, which would mean the Zivug Shalom, where they're both united together. It's called Shavim B'Keimosan, which means they're equal in stature. So in a sense, it's like their total intimate connection, a complete Zivug, and they're gazing and absorbing the Metzach of Arich Anpin, which in turn, as I said, draws from Atik, Pnimius Atik. So he says, Atzmis Binah, he calls it Shar Hanun. The Nesiv La Yadu, which means an unknown nesiv. So already it's connecting to levels that are beyond conscious understanding, like Radla, Reisha D'lo Yishadam. Doesn't say that explicitly. So that's when basically you can put it in simple, let's call it cognitive terms, when you begin to contemplate an idea, like he speaks about in Tanya Perek Gimel. So the beginning of an idea is a spark of Chachma. We know that spark is not just the beginning, the kernel and the seed of the idea that will be developed in Binah. We also know that that kernel carries in it an awareness of a reality greater than Chachma. It's like Chachma receiving from Keser, or in the language here, from Arich and Atik. Then that spark, that Nakuda, spreads out, expands, as we begin to understand the idea. Now, the expansion of it, which is the rule always, makes the Oyer weaker because it's spreading now into Kalim. Just like it is. When you have the kernel of an idea, it's all concentrated in a seed. When the seed begins to develop, the mile of that is that you're understanding it, you're internalizing it, you're integrating. You could say, I understand this idea. Chachma, you could just say, wow, koyach ma, oh wow, something great, a certain type of resonance or revelation, epiphany. In Binah, is being internalized, you're developing it, breaking it down to parts. It's like developing any concept into a full-blown, a full fleshed out idea. So Chachma needs to keep Binah honest, so to speak. So Chachma is like the point of the market correction if Binah wanders off too far. So Chachma keeps it aligned. But we're still in the world of Binah. Binah, in turn, once you have his bananus, as Chassidus explains, from Chachma alone, even though the midas originate from there, but it's like the seed of a father, from that alone, you're not going to have a child. You need to have the expansion of Binah. These bananus leads to an emotions. You contemplate on godliness. In Tanya chapter 3, he says, I'm a malak kalalman, sevav kalalman, kula kamei kalachashiv. You contemplate all of that, and that evokes, that awakens, or stimulates, or better, gives birth to emotions. And Binah now is taking care of these emotions, like a mother taking care of her children. But that's not the ultimate. You want Binah to then turn back to Chachma, and now that you have the full internalized understanding and the details, you want it to now join Chachma to also experience that higher reality. Not just say Chachma experiences and Binah is bring it down to lower levels. I mean, just to put it in a very simple example. When a shliach goes out, shluchah shalom kamesh of the Rebbe, to go bring Torah and Chassidus to people anywhere in the world. So you could say, you know what? It's not the Chassidus as we heard it from the Rebbe, because now it's diluted. It has to be brought down to the level of students who may not be completely familiar. So you're not really bringing the full magnitude of Chassidus, Ma'ayin Eisecha, to Chutzah. You're bringing you're streaming it. It's like the Ma'ayin Eisecha, the springs of water, the Mayon itself, the source. The Chutzah is getting that water. It's not, God forbid, in any way distorted, but it's minimal. It's like Binah compared to Chachma. Chachma is like a Mayon, Binah is like a river. So it's like a river. But that's not the Kavanah, especially in many sikhs, but especially in Vayeshev, Ayin Beis, Shabbos Pasha Vayeshev, Ayin Beis, that historic sikh where the Rebbe speaks about the Alter Rebbe opposing France during the war and wanting Russia to win, and now we can conquer France. That was that sikh. In that very sikh, the Rebbe says the kavanah is not just to bring a reflection of, or a flow, or a river. It doesn't say the word river into chutzah, but the etzem hamayana should be at every place in chutzah. Every place should become its own, fully contained, the full experience of Elokus as it is in its source. Basically, it doesn't say Magda 770, but the idea is that every place should become, the Rebbe even uses the word Mitziyusi Matzmusei. It should be a source, not just a recipient. So just as an example, so that would be that Binah, and again, I'm comparing it to Chachma Binah, it's not in the Sikha. So Binah is not just drawing from Chachma and giving it to the children, to the Midas. Binah itself then returns to Chachma. When it returns, I don't mean physically returns, it means it now absorbs what Chachma is. Together with Chachma, they now experience the core essence from the source itself, Arich and Atik. And that's called the Zivuk Shalom, And that's the highest level, what he calls the tachlis gadlus, before he used the expression. This is the ultimate maturity of the emotions, because now the emotions are not just children being taken care of by their mother, guided, refined, directed, which is the level of Binah, of the zivug, that's not complete. But now everything is being elevated to that higher level. So it's like the entire person, from head to toe, from moichin and midas, everything is absorbed by a reality which is a lakus that's l'mayla me'olamus, higher than the structure of Atzilus and the spheres and the natural structure as well of mutfa, murgish, and mus. Now it's the highest level of muskal, to put it in the context of what we just learned. So for example, we talk about, Chassidus talks about, the Rebbe brings it very often, that the Bayis edition, the first Beis Hamikdash was Amshacha Mamayla Lamata. Bayis Sheni was Mamata Lamayla. Each has a Maila. Mamayla Lamata, the energy is a higher level, but it's not internalized, it's not integrated. Mamata Lamayla is integration, but the level is not that high. It's like the difference between Asrusa de Le'ela and Asrusa de L'Tat. Asrusa de Le'ela comes from a great place, but it's not you. It's not your initiative. When you do your initiative, it's less gilui, but more internal, more primis. Like the expression, Adam reitze b'kav shalei yesem etisha kav mishal chaveri. A person prefers one measure that you earn on your own than 9 measures that you receive as a gift. So $9 million is a lot more than $1 million. You can buy more, but it's not yours. And therefore you could also easily scrounge it, splurge it, or lose it. So then comes la'asad lave, through the long Aveda and Golus, where we work very much in internalizing a lakus and godliness through our Aveda and through the struggles and so on. Mashiach comes, the Bayis Shlishi will be Kedenu, will have the Maila of Maila Lamata, be the highest Gili, but that highest Gili will also be internalized. Now that, of course, takes a long Aveda, because you want to have both qualities. To say it's internalized, yes, but maybe it's not like the student internalized the idea, but it's not on the level of the teacher's mind. Like 40 years old or 40 years later, it becomes Koi Inish Adaita the Rabbi, like we're going to read in this week's Pasha. Until Ad Hayemaz, until they reach 40, the 40th year in the wilderness, it says, Lo Yehoya Lechem Lev Ladas, Anayim Liris, as Naim Lishmaya, a heart to know, eyes to see. Something happens. Chassidus uses that as an example when the Talmud becomes like the Rav. And frankly, it goes further in Samagvav that it actually becomes greater than the Rav, which means it's even greater than the energy that originated in the teacher. But that's not relevant to this particular, a second, it is relevant, because that's a Chodesh. In other words, we don't just bring the world back to Elam HaMilui Nivra as the world was when it was created. So the world was created in a perfect way. Then the sin, Chetei Tzadas, and the other transgressions concealed Elokus. When we repair that, we'll get back not just to the way it was in the beginning, but even greater, Er Chodesh, and then you'll have all the milas. You'll have the mila of internalized, the mila of a higher level of experience, and all joining together as Binah and Chachma stand and gaze at the Metzach of Arich, which draws the energy of Primius Atik, Das of Atik, as we explained, the Shinai and the 370 Nahidin. Or in the words of what the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, chapter 36, that from using the verse that when Mashiach comes, your eyes will see your teacher. It no longer will be a shield, a garment, a konaf, a type of filter, but you'll be able to see the face of God himself. Ayin ba'ayin yiro, eye to eye, as he cites different verses. What's the meaning of that? That today, there's no way you can look at the sun without shades. You can't look at a lukus directly. But then will be v'nigla kved Hashem v'ro kol basar yachta. The basar itself will be able to experience godliness in a direct way. Ra'u. This is all riyah, which is of course chokhmah. So this is where it all joins together. But obviously you can't jump there. You have to go through the steps, because if you don't go through the steps, it's not going to be internalized. Because you don't just want to gilly a flash from above. You want it to be something that's completely internalized. And that's when you reach this level, this highest level of the zivuk shalom that he's describing here. Okay, so that sums up more or less the section that we learned yesterday, which also ties together all the ideas from page 1236 and 1237. And essentially, it's all growing the process, just to keep the flow, the process from mutva, murgesh, muskel, as we begin from childhood, from even literally from pregnancy, ibur unique moichin, and develop, first the emotions begin to develop, the mind takes more control, more guidance, until the mind leads the emotions to experience something that's completely beyond human subjectivity and self-interest, which is where the emotions begin with. And that's this highest level that we're learning. Now, this is all going to come to explain. We haven't yet gotten back. This all began on all the way back on page, oh boy, it goes back a while. Yeah. The bottom of page 1220, where he was going to talk about Gan Eden and the difference in Gan Eden and the law and the worlds themselves. So we're going to get back to that in a while. But just that's where the whole idea began, when he started speaking about the growth of Zoh, because it's all about how the revelation, how we grow step by step in absorbing and experiencing godliness. But we'll get back to that. That's just the connection. Okay. Now, I'll take some questions if anybody wants to ask anything. And then I'll continue from the beginning of the next paragraph on page 1241. Any questions?
Rabbi Jacobson, it would seem to me that it's not only summing up from page 1230 or whatever you said, but it seems to me that this is summing up all of Ayin Beis. I mean, they're talking about the highest level of interface on them. A zivuk shalom seems to be the complete interface with God that we can achieve, from seichel midas down into lower levels. I guess when we get to Gan Eden, we'll go down to Bria and Yitzhak, but our lowest level. And this is amazing. Isn't this am I making a mistake here? Or it seems like this is the complete relationship we have with God. Zivuk shalom seems to be what we're shooting for.
Yeah, I've said that this is definitely part of the whole general theme, but there's also the actual structure of Ayin Beis, how we got here. So that's what I was referring to, the flow from the previous sections. In other words, there's much more. The Hemshech isn't ending here. There's more to go. So clearly there's more to talk about. But yes, this is clearly part of that whole interface. And it's more than that. It's even the operational element of it, how you implement it. Until now, we learned the concept that we want to have post-Tzimtzum consciousness should experience a pre-Tzimtzum reality. But this is also how to do it in the Hizbananus as we grow from the natural behavioral to the emotional to the cognitive, all the way to the Zivuk Shalom. So yes, that is indeed correct. And I did mention a number of times, but there's also, as I said, there's the flow of Einoid that this volume began with, and then he moved into Havai Yechat Meriva, and then he moved to Gan Eden and Elam Haba. So there's a lot being tied together here, but it's correct. Yeah.
And one more question, one more observation. Maybe it's not correct, but it seemed like, I don't have it in front of me, the Ayin Beis, but I think you quoted that eventually we'll reach the level of Ayin Ba'ayin, which seems to me that we're moving from Ayin B'Netzach, which is Chitzonius of Arich, to Ayin Ba'ayin would be that we could then see the inner workings of God, so to speak, the Chachma and the Seichel behind the Ratzon that is concealed right now. But that would be, to me, like level of Ayin Ba'ayin, which would be an even a higher level than looking at the Metzach, Chachma Bina, Mistakel, Ala Metzach. Is that correct? Or
partially, because there's also a discussion, not right here, but in other Maimorim, especially Tzemach Tzedek, whether the Metzach, on one hand, is just the Ratzon itself, is the determination, without the Tam Komus, is that higher or lower than the Chachma within it? So in some places it says that the Galgalta, the skull, and including the forehead, have something that's deeper even than the inner reason behind it. So it depends how you're speaking. So sometimes the Metzach is actually quite a high level, and obviously it'll be a combination of both. So it's correct to say that we'll have both the connection to the Metzach, which is like I don't know if I call it chitzenius arich, but at least it is the heskim that he said. Just the determination without us knowing all the deeper reason behind it, either the concealed reason or the deeper heskim, which is completely in God's domain. But it's correct to say, I just don't like to spell it out on my own without actually hearing it in the Maimer, because I'm not sure which level is which. But overall, it's correct to say that as we climb, we ultimately come to a point where you could like see God face to face, if you wish. But you have to also understand what that means, because it doesn't necessarily mean on our level of seichel, it's on God's level of seichel. So we'll talk about that. He may talk about this as we go along, but the general gist is in that direction, correct?
Where's it Tzemach Tzedek talk about that level of Gagalta and Metzach could be higher than
the Teira Tetzava that I mentioned, the tzitz, the mimer about the this is based on the mimer of the Mittler Rebbe. It's actually a mimer of the Alter Rebbe that he said on the first day of Pesach, Tovkuf Samach Vov. The Mittler Rebbe wrote down that mimer. It's printed in Teres Chaim, and from Teres Chaim to Eira Teira Tetzava, page, if I recall, I said 1707 or something like that. Aleph Shin Yud Zayin, I believe.
In page Lamed Zayin, he didn't say that. He's talking about mitzcho. וההסכם יש בו תוקף גודל יסר מהרוצן השופע השכל, כי הוא באמס עצם הרוצן של מעלה מהשכל.
Yeah, that's where he hinted to it, correct. Yeah, page 17, correct. Yeah, that's where he hinted to it. And also, if you want to go into this subject, you have to go to in volume 1 in Ayin Beis. If you're really interested in looking it up, it talks about this more at length, about the Maila, the quality of Galgalta Rotzen versus the Chachmas Tima, each one has something that the other does not have. If you want, I can give you the place for that. Where is that? I'll find it quickly, I'll give it to you now. If not, I'll look it up. It's in the 300 pages, 300 and something. I don't remember exactly where. It's later. Anyway, the topic is discussed in different places. Also in the Likutei Torah talks about it in a few places very directly. But I'd rather not go into that right now. It is relevant, but since he's not addressing it, we'll wait. I think he may address it, and if he doesn't, we'll come back to it. Now, I do want to give you more information. I did look up the train tapuchim, the two apples. And you happen to be right, Rabbi Eliezer. It is the two cheeks that do not have hair on them. So the source for the train tapuchim is in Zohar, where he talks about the Yud Gimel Tikkun Dikna, the 13. So the Yud Gimel Tikkun Dikna are connected to Yud Gimel Midas, and we have the Mazolis, like we talk about Mazel Hazayim, Mazel Aches, Hayud Gimel. There's the 13 different signs or constellations. And he says there that the Tikkun Zayin, the seventh Tikkun, are the Trein Tapuchim, that do not have Cyrus on them. So in other words, we have the beard, which is more around the chin and the lower part of the face. You have the payas on the sides of the temples. You have the forehead, and you have the cheeks. All this is part of the face, the countenance. And what he said there, what he says there in the Zohar, context of what we learned here, if you look, he was discussing here not contradiction, but at least the question that in the Maimer Chukas, Zeis Chukas, HaTeira, it said that the face reflects an Inyan Atzmi. He said in the parenthesis, that one second. Yeah, that ha'aras panim is atzmi. In Eitz Chaim, he said that only the zivuk shalim, when they look at the metzach, That's a higher level. But when zivug is not shalom, it's not complete. They look at the face. That's what the Eitz Chaim said.
Wow.
Said clearly that these words.
Wow.
Hold on. The oz abba v'im mistaklim b'chinas ponim da'arich. So it seems like there's a contradiction between the Maimer and Zeis Chukas that says ponim is atzmi, and the Eitz Chaim that says ponim is lower than atzmi, because that's when abba v'ima are not complete. So the Rebbe Rashab explained, I'm reading from page 1241 in the parentheses. V'tzarech lemer, the sham hakavona ala gilu detrein tapuchin. That there in the Maimer and the Zeis Chukas, he's talking about the face, not just the metzach. He's talking about the middle stage, which is like the cheeks, the trein tapuchin, which is the tikkun hazayin, haponim mesidus, that is devoid of, does not have hair. What it says in Eitz Chaim, that it's only the ponim, that's the lower level of zivug is not complete. He said, that means the face, the lower part of the face, where there are sidus, and sidus is yenkim and mazel achezra yud gimel, is a lower level, because the energy is flowing through like the thin strands or the wires of the hair. And that's where he brought that lechem haponim is a high level of ponim. At the same time, it's letzeda ha'elamus. It's se'eda, it's the food, the sustenance for the world. That means it's an energy that relates more to existence. So basically we have three levels here. We have the metzach, the forehead, which is when the zivug is shalom, complete. You have the middle ground where it's not the metzach, but it's the face, but it's above the hair, the trein tapuchin, and then the cheeks. And then you have what the Eitz Chaim says, when the zivug is not complete, it's receiving from the ponim, and their ponim means that is traveling and being transmitted through the cyrus, the hair. That ties that up. I said I would bring that back into the picture.
So that's a new thing, that Heoras Ponim, Oyer Atzmi, is talking about the trein tapuchin, which are the cheeks and not the mitzvah.
Yeah.
What's the difference between the mitzvah and the trein tapuchin?
The mitzvah is connected das of atik, and the trein tapuchin are lower level. That means it's still a hamshacha. Remember, in arich itself, you can have a metzach, you can have, just like you have an arich, you have arich shebarich, you have chachma shebarich, binah shebarich. It's levels in arich ampin itself. Here, it seems to be all the face, which is all part of the. Anyway, you have to look in the Maimer Zeis Chukas that he referred to. There, he talks about this more.
And
I don't know if he distinguishes between the Metzach and the. Look, he's coming to reconcile between the Maimer Zeis Chukas and the Eitz Chaim. That's what he's coming to do here.
Yeah. Some from here that is Zivug.
But the main focus here is Metzach of Zoh and Metzach of Arich. That's the main focus. This is coming when you talk about the details of the Eitz Chaim. There's a Zivug in Ol Shalom. But the real focus is Metzach, which draws from Das of Atik or the Pnimius Atik. And then there's the Zivuk De'ena Shalom, where the Binah relates more to the Midas, and it's not on the Shavim B'Kemos on the same level as Chachma, and that is a lower level. That's the lower level. But in the parentheses, he qualifies and brings up the thing with the cheeks.
What
Incredible.
What is diknin?
What does dikna mean?
Yeah.
Zokin.
Both?
Dikna is Aramaic for zokin, for beard.
Yeah. Okay. Cyrus. So this
Cyrus.
is including also the trein tapuchin, because you gimel tikkunei.
Yeah. He said trein tapuchin is the tikkun hazayin. That's what it says in Zoya. This is from Zoya. Trein tapuchin is from Zoya. So Zoya Idra Rabbah, the same Zoya that we're learning in there discusses each tikkun aleph, tikkun. So he was talking about, it's like v'neitzad. I think the tikkun v'neitzad, which is tikkun mazel of v'neitzad. He said it earlier. I think he said it earlier, maybe not. I don't want to go into it right now. It's going to be confusing. Let's stick to where we are. And
but if I can just suggest to Rabbi Taitel, the seventh one is the middle of the Yud Gimel Midas Arachmi. It's the middle gate, which is right. Exactly middle. The 7 is the middle of 13. So it's Das. Das is the middle kav between Chachma and Binah. Maybe if I may suggest, maybe it's just a derech efshar possible that the two cheeks are a level of maybe chachma and bina, because there's two sides, there's two cheeks, whereas there's only one metzach. Rabbi Tektel.
Yes, I have to.
I'm just getting carried away. I'm sorry. I'm getting carried away, but it's exciting
I
stuff.
I appreciate your enthusiasm. We appreciate your enthusiasm, but when it comes to these matters, before I would come to any conclusions or suggestions, this is discussed in Kabbalah and Chassidus relatively at length, and they spell it all out. So I would check it out first there, and then bring it back here. So
thank you.
So maybe it's a theory, but remember, these are levels that are discussed and the detail. What exactly is each of these 13 levels in the Mazolos? Here he just says the seventh is this one which we called the Trein Tapuchin, and then he said the Cyrus is Yankim Mazel Haches VaYud Gimel, the 8th and the 13th. If I recall correctly, in the Eira Teira he talks about this as well. And as far as the Golgalta goes, I don't find it quickly. I thought it was right here, but maybe not. Okay, maybe it's later. Probably later. Okay.
I remember the discussion of Golgalta, so I'll go back to that. I remember that.
Remember Golgalta? Oh, here we are. I did find it. It's chapter 209 Beis. Where he speaks about Atik and Arich, the Golgalta. Generally speaking, the Golgalta is Rotz and Mitzvahs, and Chochmas Tema is Torah. So the question is, which is higher, Torah and Mitzvahs? So they each have something the other does not have. Okay. Let's continue. Unless anybody wants to ask anything. Okay, fine. Ubir Inyan. Okay, now we're beginning, within this topic is going to begin another subset. So I'll keep the flow. I'll try to explain the flow, but he's now going to explain further the two levels of Binah and Chachma, these two, I assume the two levels of the Zivug. Or maybe the two levels in Binah itself. I'm not sure. Let's see. So he's now going to explain this further, and then going to come back to the Avodah of it all. At the end of this section, another 10 pages, we're going to come back to Gan Eden. That's going to be on page 1254. We're now on 1241. We have another 13 pages to go in this subject before he goes back all the way back to Gan Eden, what I said, 1220, where this whole subject began to be discussed. Okay. Now, I have my theory why the Rebbe Rashab is elaborating so much. I already explained it once, because seemingly, why do we need all this to understand the whole idea of Ein Oid and what Gan Eden is and the different levels of revelation? But I think, as we just pointed out, in the context of Ayin Beis, Rebbe Rashab is now going through a very thorough operational plan, if you wish, of how we indeed implement this interface from a level when we begin as little children, barely have are just behavioral, natural impulses, to get to a level of being completely connected to godliness in the highest levels. So this is not just a digression here. He's actually analyzing all these steps, and I think this next section goes even deeper into this. So he says like this now. Ayin Beis Madregas now, an explanation of the inyan of these two levels, the two above mentioned levels. As I said, I'm not positive because I didn't look ahead which two levels we're talking about, but it could be the Zivug Shalom, the Zivug not Shalom, or it could be within Binah itself, the two levels. Well, that would be the Zivug Shalom. I think that's the two levels. Dehine, and here's the explanation. Dehine Binah, he b'china shem sag. Okay, back to some Kabbalah here. Binah is the level of Shem Sag. So a little refresher. What is Shem Sag? So we know the Yud Kei Vav Kei, the Tetragrammaton, the name, the holy name, the Shem HaMefurish, Shem HaMeyuchad, the Shem Shem HaMafurish, Shem HaMiyuchid, Shem Ha, it's another name for it. I forgot what it is. The highest of the names of God is Havaya, Yud Kei Vav Kei. And we see it so often cited. And not only that, every aspect of it. The shape of the four letters, Yud, Hey, and then the Vav and Hey. The gematria of 26. But there's also what's called the Miluyim. The Miluyim of every Hebrew word, including Yud Kei Vav Kei. The Milui means complete. The Milui means when you take a letter like Yud, so when you write it, Yud Kei Vav Kei, it's four letters. But when you pronounce Yud, you're pronouncing the full word. Yud Vav Dalet. Hey is Hey Aleph. It's not the only way to say it. I'll explain in a minute. Vav. You're not just, and again, in writing, it's four letters, but when you spell it out, and that's called a milui, I think there's a word for it in English, when you break a word into its full pronunciation. I forgot what the word is. But regardless, so then when you do that, so Yud, Kei, Vav, Kei has a whole bunch of different permutations. So Kabbalah explains, this is in Zayar, and especially the Arizal and others, explain that there are actually four main miluyim. Because the Yud, we always spell the same way, Yud, Vav, Dalet. But the Hey and the Vav can be spelled different ways. The Hey can be spelled Hey Aleph. It can be spelled Hey Hey. It can be spelled Hey Yud. They all are legitimate. The Vav can be Vav Vav, Vav Aleph Vav. I think those are the only two. You could technically also do Vav Yud Vav.
I think so.
Yeah. So you see, so the three of the four letters have different combinations. So Kabbalah explains, Chassidus elaborates, that therefore the 26 is Yud Kei Vav Kei alone. But when you go with the Milui Alfin, which means when you use Aleph throughout, it will add up to 45. Remember, Yud Vav Dalet is always the same. That's always 20. Yud is 10, Vav and Dalet 6 and 4, 20. Question is, what are the other three? So Hey would be 6. The last Hey would also be 6. That's 12. So 12 and 20 is 32. And the Vav, Aleph Vav, remember Alephs. Hey Aleph, Vav Aleph Vav, Hey Aleph is 13. There you have 45. Shema. That's when you hear the word Shema. Now, Ma itself has many levels of significance. Ma means bittul. Ma is gematria Odom. Odom is gematria Ma. Mem Aleph Dalet. Aleph Dalet Mem is 45. That's one milui. The second milui is the milui Heyin. Hey, where now you're counting Hey Hey, not Hey Aleph. And Hey Hey. And I think Vav, we'll see in a second. 20 Yud, Hey Hey is another 10, 30. The last Hey Hey is 40. And we want to get to Ban, 52. So yes, so there Vav doesn't have a Hey. So you just do Vav Vav. So you have 52. 52 is when we say Shem Ban. That's Shem Ban, Beis Nun. Shem Ban is Gematria Behema. So Chassidus talks about Shema, Shem Ban. The yichud of Shem Ma and Ban, a lot of my morim about Yitzchak and Rivka. Sometimes Ma and Ban is Zocher and Akeva. Different ways to explain it.
And the Novi is Ban.
Yeah, Moshe is Ma. Yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot on this. The third milui, just to be, let's go through it already, is milui. If I recall correctly, this one is a combination. This one's going to add up to 63. Trying to remember. The last one is milui Yudin. That I know. The Ab, the highest, the highest number. But let's do Samach Gimel. How does Samach Gimel go? Now we're talking about Sag. Shem Sag is 63. So again, Yud is 20. It's always 20. I think Hey, you do here Hey and Hey would be with Hey Yud would be 15. Hey Yud would be 30. 30 plus 20 is 50. And I think you do Vav Aleph Vav. So this is a mix. This is not a milui that's consistent. This goes like this. Yud is 20. Hey Yud is 15. That makes it 35. Vav Aleph Vav is 13. That's 58. And again, Hey Yud, 58, and 15 is 63. Right? No, something wrong. Did I get it wrong?
That was 73.
73. So something wrong. 1 second. We have to get rid of 10. Maybe it's hey, 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 hey. And Vav Aleph Vav. Probably that's correct. Would that work?
You said it right.
Yeah,
Right.
that gets you to 63.
Okay.
Hey, hey.
Hey, hey. Okay, so it's not Hey Yud. Sorry. There's Taka not Yudin, right? Correct. So the only difference.
I think it's Hey Yud. 2 Hey Yud is 30 and Yud is 20. Is 50. And
No,
Vav
Yud is
Aleph
not
Vav is 63. Hey Yud.
Oh, you're right. You're right. I did say it right. Yeah, correct.
You say it right.
Yeah, yeah. 30 for the Hey Yuds, 20 for the Yud. That's 50. And Vav Aleph Vav is 13, right? 63. I must have added it wrong when I did it. Okay, that's how it is. Then comes, I'll soon get back to Sag. Then comes Ab. Shem Ab would be 72. Here goes, everything is Yuds. So you have the 20 from Yud. You have Hey Yud, and Hey Yud is 30, is 50. And Vav Yud Vav is 12, is 22. That's 72. Okay, fine. Now, it may sound initially when you hear it for the first time like, what is this? You know, it sounds almost like very, what is this, a game of just getting numbers? But you have to remember that the letters, the Hebrew letters of the Hebrew alphabet, like he says in Tanya, in Shiur Vamuna, are channels of energy. They're not just letters. We're not just playing with letters here. It's channels of divine energy. And they all break down into so many different, think of it like DNA or the building blocks, the very amino acids and the DNA of life. So you have the similar, they're all similar, but they have to break into so many different combinations to create the diversity of life. So essentially the DNA spiritually is the Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. And the Yud-Kei Vav-Kei has all these different branches and permutations. And we're only talking here about the Miluyim. When you add gematria and you add chilufim and tmuris, as the Alter Rebbe brings there, the exchange of letters, how aleph replaces a tov, and many other different type of letter combinations, which is quite fascinating. It's a whole study of these Hebrew letters. You have all these different channels which create the different realities that we have. So here we have now 4 paradigms: Ma, Ban, and then Sag and Ab, which goes by the numbers: 45. 52, 63, and 72. So I'm mentioning only simply to make sense of this. Now, the truth is, in volume 1, it's a long time ago, we must have learned it 4 or 5 years ago, we talked about this at length because there's a whole discussion on Sag and Ab. Very often, Sag is connected to the world of Tohu, and Ab is from the world of Ak, Adam Kadmon. We're going to see here how he's going to explain it. But right now, I said all of this just to explain this one line, that Binah, Hibchina Shem Sag, is the name Sag. Now you'll say 1 second here. So what is the connection? The connection is because each of the spheres have also, they relate to different permutations. So generally, Yud Kei Vav Kei, for the record, Yud is usually Chachma, Hey is Binah, Vav is Midas, Zah, and the last Hey is Malchus. In the worlds, Atzilus is Yud, Bria is Hey, Yitzir is Vav, and Asiya is Hey. But yet, when you go down more, when you dissect it further, you can have also these permutations like we just said. So he says, Binah is the level of Shem Sag. And now he's going to explain this level of Sag. What is this level called Sag? Which is 63, this unique combination of the Yud Kei Vav Kei as it's written out. Is it, when we say phonetics or phonetically, what do we mean when we say phonetically? Does that mean how we pronounce it? Is that what the word phonetically means?
Essentially, yes. It's how you take the vowel and turn it into an expanded
Okay, so essentially,
articulation.
So then miluyim would basically be the phonetical, of the phonetics of Yud Kei Vav Kei. Okay, fine. Just was wondering. Okay, v'yadua, and it's known the b'shem sag yesh beis madreges. There are two levels in shem sag. U'kamoshe kosav, as it's explained, as it's written, ba'abir de v'kibla Yehudim. This we're talking about is Torah Eir from the Alter Rebbe. So there's a section there on Megillah Esther. And the V'kibla Yehudim, of course, is a mimer from the Megillah, a pasuk in the Megillah, V'kibla Yehudim. So there's a mimer from the Alter Rebbe, and there's an explanation. When you say beer of V'kibla Yehudim, is the explanation on the mimer of V'kibla Yehudim. The Rebbe, Alter Rebbe, was very often would say a mimer, and then either that same Shabbos or later in the same holiday, later in the day, or sometimes a week later, sometimes months later, he would say a beer on that mimer. This is very common by the Alter Rebbe. More than all the other Rabbeim didn't do that really. The Rabbeim sometimes had a mimer and a hemshech of maimorim, a series of maimorim. But by the Alter Rebbe, you have a beer, and sometimes you even have a beer, lib beer. A beer of the explanation of the explanation, and sometimes there's a beer rishon and a beer sheni. So if you look at the Alter Rebbe's Maimorim, you'll find this, that's pretty common. A mimer, a beer on the mimer, which is a second mimer, and then a beer on the beer. Or as I said, different beerim of that. So in the beer of V'kibla Yehudim, what does he say? Be'inyan v'sus asher rochav alav hamelach. So there he talks about also in the Megillah, when Achashverosh tells Haman that you should reward Mordechai, exactly like you said. And one of the things was that he should be ridden, he should be led on this horse, of which the king's horse, the horse that the king rides on.
Haman said to Achashverosh.
Yeah, and then Achashverosh told him to go do that, to fulfill that, right? So the Alter Rebbe says, Sus, the Sus is Bigematria Beis Pomim Sag, a horse, which is 126 is twice 60. 1 second. Yeah, twice 63. So that's what Alter Rebbe says. The sus is gematria twice sag. So what do we have here? So we see that in sag, there's two levels. He's going to explain what these two levels are. I'm only smiling because whenever I teach this to people who never heard this before, they're completely bewildered. Because here suddenly you're talking about a name. Sag itself is a whole discussion like I just did for 15 minutes. You know, that Yud Kei Vav Kei and the different phonetics, as we said, 63. And now we go into 63 twice. And now it's connected to a horse. It's like when you initially look at it, it looks like you're just, in Yiddish, there's an expression, avant to avant. You're just like putting walls to walls. It's like mixing things that seemingly have no relationship with each other. However, when you're familiar with Kabbalah, and especially how Chassidus explains it, once you understand it, you start realizing that we're dealing here with very profound levels. That's why I said before DNA. Look at zeros and ones in computer programming. Everything is a 0 and a 1. It comes down to just a 0 and a 1. It's just how you combine them. So it's not that surprising that the same would be spiritually, that there's certain basic building blocks, and it's how you combine them. And they create different type of realities. So we'll soon see the connection to it all. But I'm just saying it for anyone that's bewildered a bit, that just giving a little introduction. Okay. So he says, Ukamoy al derech mashal, like for example, like what does sus have to do with sag? What are these two things of sag and sus? Hasus shehu rotz megavoy lenamuch mahar lebika. When a sus, a horse, a galloping horse, is running down a hill, megavoya from a higher place to a lower place, mahar from a hill or a mountain, lebika to a valley. So you're talking about a horse running down from higher to lower, galloping. V'chein mebika lahar, or the same is from the opposite way. He's running up from the bika, from the valley to the mountain. So in other words, the Alter Rebbe and the Rebbe Rashab is citing that you have a sus. What does the sus represent? A journey, a travel either going from top down or from the bottom up. So he says the same thing is you have in the same sag, you have also two stages, two levels. Shem sag, sus consists of two levels of sag. Shu b'chinas yirida, they clarify below that it's mamayla lamato. It's a yirida mamayla lamato because you can't say yirida mamata lamayla. So it's a toz de muchach. You have to say, he means to say that it's a yirida like the horse that's running a level, running from higher to lower. V'hu inyan the ima revia albonin. That's the inyan that we learned in the previous paragraph. That ima, that the mother is covering, or revia is spread out over her children.
Hovering.
Huh? Hovering over her children. Why? Because that's mamayla lamata. Binah is up, is the mother, higher. The mother is not looking up toward Chachma, the mother is looking down toward the children, covering the children. So he says that's the first same sag, the first level of sag. You read the mamayla lamata, which in the sus is the example that when the horse running downward. This is referring to the hamshacha taking seichel, a contemplation, an idea, bina, and drawing it into the midas, which are the children, are the chicks. The latest hamidas, because the birth of these emotions, whom is galus haseichel. We've been learning that these are midas. We're not talking about the midas that are naturally ingrained in us. We're talking about the midas that are birthed from this galus haseichel, as a person contemplates on something, learns to appreciate it, contemplates on godliness, learns to appreciate it, and then it awakens midas. V'hainu k'shaseichel b'efen kazeh liyas b'chinas shaychus ala midas. This means that the seichel is not in an abstract state. We're just contemplating ideas and dreaming and imagining and thinking and contemplating. We're talking about a seichel is in a form that it's relating shaychus as a relationship ela midas to the midas. U'kamoshin is bar le'il. So that's shem sag, bina. Remember shem sag, but it's bina as it relates to that which is below it. Omnom. However, this stage, as we discussed, what manifests and is enclosed within the emotion is only a reflection of the seichel. The very core idea, the very core seichel remains makif, hovering elamida. In other words, the emotions are receiving and being directed by intelligence, but the midas and the moichin are not in the same level. The midas are only a reflection, like the result. Once you contemplate, let's say, on a deep concept of Sevav Kalam or Mamala Kalam or anything, something, a deep idea in Chassidus, you learn it, you understand it well. The emotion that's awakened from that, that's stimulated, does not have the intensity of all your understanding, of all your bina. It's getting like the psak din, so to speak, the bechein. The result of this whole contemplation is that I love God, I'm drawn to God, or I stand in awe of God, av or yira. That's called ha'ara. It's not the full brain power of bina. It's only ha'ara. Like the awakening or the stimulation of love that comes through hasaga, through comprehension. These bonus and contemplation, begdulas Hashem, in the greatness of God. So therefore, when that happens, so also, even when the Eir HaSeichel, or the Eir HaSaga, the energy, the light of the comprehension, is radiating b'teich hamida in the emotion. Remember, we learned earlier that also the seichel can go away, or be forgotten, and all you have is the determination. But we're talking here, the seichel is radiating in the emotion. He's qualifying now even more. That's not that the awakening or the stimulation or arousal of love is not just from the bechein, the takeaway message, so to speak. The kirvas alakim li toiv, that being close to God is good for me. It's more than that. It's not just the conclusion. I said before bechein. He's saying now even more than that. Ki'im, we're talking about a level. The comprehension of greatness of God, of God's magnitude, of God's grandeur, is felt in his heart. And he's awakened and stimulated, and he's stimulated to love. He's in a state of love. Nevertheless, even with that, not just the bechein, even when that's there, nevertheless, that which radiates in the emotion, it's still a reflection of the seichel. So the midah is fully alive and being impacted by the contemplation, because you're like there. It's not just you finish contemplating and you just came to a conclusion. It's a takeaway message, so to speak. The full seichel is radiating, but it's still a reflection of the midah. The etzem hasoga, the next page, 1242, the etzem hasoga, the very core comprehension, v'izbonus, and contemplation, hu b'chinas makif ala midah, is in a state of makif, like hovering above on the midah, because the midah is still not the seichel. The intensity of understanding is much more on a core level. The midah is ultimately, it's born from it. It's like a child of its mother. V'hainu, just want to see where I want to stop here. I want to stop somewhere. But I see it keeps on going. Oh. Well, let me read a few more lines and we'll just go a little long. V'hainu, she'ena misalemes hasoga. She'ena misalemes hasoga kamei ba'amidah shabo ma'bechein. Yeah, he's explaining further. So we're not talking about that the hasoga is concealed. An emotion that comes from a takeaway. Bechein means like what is okay? So what do we take away from this? There, the seichel is misalemes, because now you're only talking about a takeaway message, so to speak, a takeaway experience. Then the moichin is concealed. He's going back to this point. He's just elaborating. But when the midah comes from the feeling that comes out of the hasaga, we're not just talking the bechein. Bechein again is the end of the comprehension and contemplation. You have a takeaway. But when the midah comes from the hergish hasaga, where we said, so there you have the meichin are not concealed, but they're in a state of makif on the midah. Perek Tes, Geras HaTshuva, chapter 9, he says, Sha'ideshim is beinin b'gedulas Hashem. Through contemplating on the greatness of God, ba'amokus hadas, with a very hamokus, in-depth concentration, u'moilid miruach binose, and what gives birth from ruach binose, from the spirit of his Binah, from Binah, Dechila v'rechim sichlim, which is ava v'yira, love and awe, that are cognitive emotions, as we've learned. Ozai nikras ha'em revetzes al hafrechim. Now, as he's explaining this level, that when Binah is called, the mother that spreads over, like hovers over the hafrechim, the chicks. So we have basically three levels here. We have the moichin itself, the mother. We have a state where the seichel is radiating into the emotions, but it's still makif. The mother is hovering over and spreading over the midas, and then you have the bechein, the midah that's just coming from a result, the final takeaway, and there the seichel is concealed. But even when the seichel is not concealed, it's still so-called protecting and hovering above the midas, what's called makif. I'm going to stop here simply because of time. He's going to explain the next section. What does this Makif do? What is its role? What is it accomplishing, essentially? But remember, all this is the first level of Sag, how Binah is focused on that which is beneath it. Momayla lamata, like the sus that's going downward. Still, the connection to sus needs to be explained more, but we have the mushal. And then he's going to go in the next paragraph. If you see, Acha Madrega HaBeis the Shem Sag, he's going to go to the second level of Shem Sag, which is going to be Mamata Lamayla, like the horse going up, where Bina reaches upward, which is the second, the deeper level of Zivuk Shalom that he's going to discuss. Okay, so I'm going to stop here. Top of page 1242. Any questions so far? Remember, the topic is not over. So if you have questions on the very topic, it could be he's going to explain the next lines. But if you want to comment or question anything. Yeah. Okay. I actually was anticipating that this is going to be more complicated. I see it's not going very far off. He's just explaining B'yir Inyan, what we learned before about the two levels in Binah, through understanding the two levels in Sag. Okay. Okay, so we stop here, a few lines on top of page 12.